Welcome everyone to the Adversity to Advantage podcast. I'm very privileged. We have been trying to arrange this for a little while, but I've got Don Karp on the end of the line, all the way in Mexico. Welcome to the show, Don.
Thanks, Petra. Glad to be here.
It's really exciting to have you here. So tell our listeners just a little bit about you. What excites you? What are you passionate about?
That's good. Well, my latest passion that's been ongoing for a long time, but more emphasized, is playing blues harmonica in public with a band.
Really?
Yeah.
How long have you been playing for?
I learned when I was 15 years old. I self-taught. I don't know how to read music or anything, but I had a little book with numbers and arrows, and that's what's on the harmonica.
Oh, that's so cool. Go ahead.
Basically, my passion is being in front of audiences, whether it's teaching, speaking, facilitating a workshop, or playing music. And playing music is the very simple and basic to me.
So you're quite creative, I guess. It sounds like a really mindful activity, like something that you would be in flow doing.
Yeah, that's what I like about it. And I think the anything rhythmic breaks up what I'd call psychic cataracts. You know how your eye has a film? I think when in normal life, the way things are today, going around doing whatever we do, we pile up these cataracts covering our psyche, and the resonance of anything rhythmic breaks them up.
I think that's so true. And so many people seem to be what I call sleepwalking through life, where they're just, right? Like in a habit or a routine, or I'm in London, it's a big city, people are just on their 9 to 5, their commute. It's so fast paced and hustling, and and you kind of think, does anyone stop and actually ask themselves, is this what I want to do? Or who am I within this picture? And it sounds like the music can just be one of those disruptors that make people go for, even if for a little minute, right? Maybe there's more to life, right? Maybe there's something energetic.
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
So have you always been into music?
Yes, more or less. I mean, I would call that I've been more of a weekend warrior with the music. I'm not somebody who wakes up in the morning and starts blowing on the harmonica. And I don't even like to play unless I have somebody to play with. So that might change a little bit. I'm starting to try and learn lyrics. It's very tough for me to learn lyrics. And I'm going to learn how to play a different type of harmonica that I've been trying for years and not getting through. It's called a chromatic. So there's things I can do, and I'm sort of one big struggle I have is I'm retired. I used to be tired, now I'm retired. That happened in 2003.
Yeah.
When I moved to Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
And so basically, I have this sort of inner battle that's constantly going on about legacy. I'm 76 years old, and how much time do I have left to? I've already done quite a bit of legacy things, so I can look at that. But there's a part of me that, okay, so I'll need to focus to get these things done, right? But I'm retired, and retired means having a good time and just doing what you want to do every day and not so much on the focus. And the other part of me says, well, if you focused a little bit, maybe the free time would be even more free because you wouldn't be, thinking about the legacy during your free time. So it's this struggle.
That's actually really interesting to hear the perspective of somebody who's a little bit older and who is thinking. I mean, I think about legacy a bit, but I think of it like, oh, I still have, I'm 39, I turn 40 next year. And so I've got this the next 20, 30 years of my career, I'm going to build it like this and do this kind of stuff. So I'm still sort of forward facing. And it sounds like from your perspective in your 70s, you're kind of going, all right, I've done stuff, I've experienced, I have memories and all these things. And when does the perspective shift? I don't know. What's it like?
Well, I think, I can't measure that particular shift. I just know that when I was young, my father's religion was work, not making money, not doing a good job, but you go to work every day and you're on time. And that was his religion. And I had this paper route where I was like a teenager, maybe 15, and I had 120 papers to deliver every day and customers to collect money. It was too much responsibility. And I think this affected my whole career outlook since then. I mean, I've worked but off and on, and not real super engaged in any particular career. And maybe that's affect my outlook now. It's like now I'm feeling like this little boy wants to play, so that's what I do.
There's nothing wrong with playing, but it sounds
No.
like it's very interesting that we sort of rebel, like our whole life kind of follows a certain trajectory, and it can just be a reaction to whatever our parents were doing, right? If work
Yeah.
was God for your dad, you're a bit like, oh, I've witnessed that, and that's not exactly how I want things to be.
Right. Yeah. That's true.
Did you feel like, if you give us a bit of context about growing up, that there was a kind of pressure or expectation to be a certain way or to go down a certain track?
Hmm. Well, my father was not with me much. He was present, but not emotionally. So uh, I remember him saying when I was in high school, "Well, I heard you got an A on that report. How come you didn't get an A plus?" And for him, this was a humorous thing. For me, it was somewhat devastating.
Hmm.
So there wasn't really a sense of direction like you're talking about. For me, it was more like a lack of self-esteem, self-confidence, because I was always being put down. And as a younger child, I didn't know what to do with this really. I mean, I had these feelings and I felt ugly, stupid, and clumsy. And I didn't know where to go with these feelings. There wasn't anywhere to go with them.
Did you have, what was was your mom in the picture? Did you have
Oh yeah.
siblings?
I had siblings, I had a mom. My mom was pretty strong, only her mothering was like smothering. I couldn't tell what everything I did was so great because I'm her son, that kind
Yeah,
of thing.
which isn't necessarily great for our self-esteem, actually, because
No.
we kind of think, oh, well, whatever I do is fine over there. But then on the flip side, dad's more critical, or you've got sort of another voice saying you're not good enough, right? So that could be pretty confusing.
Yeah, yeah, that was confusing. I didn't think of it that way, but there was that dichotomy, yeah.
Yeah, mixed messages. And then what was school life like? Did so you said you sort of felt stupid, or like you weren't enough, but did you, I imagine culturally and generationally, it wasn't really taught to talk about your feelings or to kind of communicate about that stuff, the kind of tricky stuff, to anyone. So
Yeah.
what did you do? Did you just hold on to it? It just builds up over time.
Yeah, I guess I just held on to it and it built up over time. I mean, my mother was a great person. Other than what I told you, when I got to be more of an adult and further along, we became really good friends. Except not just mom and son, because we had a lot of interests that she inculcated in me. And so she sent me to summer camp every year. I began to be interested in nature and very curious. And I got involved in laboratory work in biology, and the test tubes kind of took the place of relationships. So the people that I did hang out with were nerds. They didn't call them nerds in those days, but that's
Yeah.
basically the few friends I had were mostly like that.
Do you think
And
you almost consciously did that? Like it was tough to do relationships or to navigate fitting in, and so it was easier to like focus in on that stuff?
well, I tried fitting in, and I don't think it was conscious. It was more like a, to me, that life, like I think we talked about this earlier, maybe before you turn the thing on,
Yeah.
is about life has a lot of these decisive moments where suddenly you realize, wow, this is going on. I got to stop and think about this and make a change. So I see my life as a series of those kinds of things. In junior high school and in high school, I was in a fraternity, and it was so. I mean, this is to get so I could have more friends, and it
Okay.
was kind of counterproductive because I saw the way some of the behaviors in there, and I was really shocked. And it sort of I had to leave, and I didn't get into fraternities in college or that kind of thing.
When you say kind of behaviors, are you talking about like initiation or stuff that was a bit mean or like you didn't agree with?
Well, initiation, yes, but other things like, for instance, officers, when we were having an election, these people who were nominated would go out in the hall so we could discuss them. We never talk about their abilities, their leadership abilities. We talk about their excellence in sports, how many girlfriends they had, and their gambling abilities.
Oh,
So
lovely.
that was determinant of who would be the next leader of the thing.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And they chose me to be a chaplain
Did they?
because they knew I wasn't religious, and maybe part of it was a joke. I don't really know. So I was the one who swore people in on the Bible and started off the meeting with a reading and things like that. And there were other things in there too going on.
Mm. But it didn't quite fit for you long term.
Right,
Mm.
right. So that was like, wow, this is terrible. I don't want this.
Okay, so you're making those sorts of choices. So I love what you say about these sort of moments in our life, right? Where we sort of have the option, the opportunity to sink or swim in a way, right? And I guess that's the premise of this podcast, Adversity to Advantage, is thinking, I'm just always curious about how come some of us use those moments as sort of a springboard or a catalyst for greater learning and growth, and other ones of us get stuck in addiction, depression, all sorts of things. And some of us, like me, do a little bit of both. You know, we do a little bit of everything as we figure ourselves out. Talk us through some of those moments for you. So those moments that were perhaps about adversity or challenge that perhaps changed the trajectory of your life. Can you relate to any kind of rock bottom moments?
Oh, yes. I was just going to talk about that one because this is my biggest change is like, so I went to graduate school and I wanted to become a PhD biochemist.
Yeah.
Do research and teach. And I'm strutting along through my college career. I'm in the 7th year of college, straight through sometimes summer school. I'm in graduate school. And I realize probably it was during an LSD experience. This is the late 60s. And, you know, I didn't find anything in common with it much to talk about. With other graduate students, we talk about politics, sports, and the work we were doing. They didn't, nothing about philosophy, music, the arts. That, you know, just didn't come up with those people. So I was kind of lonely. And I realized the competition that goes on in academia, in science, publish or perish, it's a lot of backbiting, old boy kinds of things. It was terrible. And I realized, geez, I'm really too sensitive. I don't think I can do this as a career. And meanwhile, while I'm going through this thinking, I had a younger brother, 10 years younger, who was fully into what was going on, the counterculture that was emerging at that time. And he kind of pulled me into it. I went to Woodstock, the festival. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah.
And I could talk a little about that. But anyway, so I'm experimenting more with psychedelics than I am in the laboratory at that time period. And so I got a hold of some very powerful marijuana, hashish. I'm smoking that every day and thinking I'm becoming an alchemist. Okay. So after a month, I started having flashbacks to the psychedelic experiences. And I think I'm being drugged in my food for different reasons. I was also involved in radical politics. So I thought people were following me. Some of these paranoias are tied into reality, at least a crumb of it. A lot of people were being followed at that time. Mm-hmm. The drugs, the radical politics. And then I started hearing whispering of voices. And I didn't know what they were saying. It was a group of people who were talking about me and saying unkind things. It was my intuition. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't get rid of this. I'd leave the house thinking it's coming from upstairs or the hall, or I didn't know why. Just couldn't get rid of these voices. And I thought maybe the dentist put a radio receiver in a filling.
Wow.
And eventually I just flipped out so bad that I drove a car off the road purposely. It was gentle. And a couple of, I guess they were plainclothesmen, interviewed me, bad cop, good cop routine. And my mother brought me to a psychiatrist at the medical center. And after a 5-minute interview, he said, you need to be in the hospital. So I signed in. And as soon as he didn't give me any alternatives. He's a professional with a tie and everything. And I'm this naive guy. So as soon as I signed in.
Were you pretty honest at that point about the voices and everything that you'd been afraid of up until that point?
With him, you mean, or?
Yeah, with him, with your mom, like once you'd, I guess, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So is it fair to say you were pretty desperate and you were like, I need some help, like this is freaking me out?
I didn't say it that way, but my actions showed that.
Sure. Okay. Yeah.
So, I open the door to go into the hospital. There's the day room, and I see these people drooling and with their clothing askew. And I said, wow, what am I doing in here? I got to get out of here. I'd rather die in the streets fighting the revolution than be killed in this hospital. And
Yeah.
so I made a feeble attempt to break out, and the men in the white coats came and, with a syringe, which I begged for pills. I got a handful of pills and ate them, and some nice aide sat with me because I thought that was my deathbed. When I woke up the next morning, what had died is my naivety. But that was like the turning point there of this whole, in the mental hospitals, when I made a decision after 7 years. It's very hard to make the decision because of the financial energy and other time investment. I made the decision, what would make my life easier is to get out of this career and quit. So I did that, and I got a master's degree because I'd done more than the necessary for that. And there's more to the story, but anyway, that was my most decisive moment. And I went through.
So wait, so just let me get this straight. So how long were you in the hospital for?
Oh, the first time for about 5 months. But
Okay.
there was recidivism. Over the next 8 years, I was in hospital 7 times, usually for a month.
And did you get diagnosed with a condition? Were they just kind of testing loads of things? Were you just on loads of medication? What was going on for you as far as a treatment plan?
Yeah, I was diagnosed paranoid schizophrenic.
Okay.
And put on antipsychotic, Thorazine.
Okay.
In the beginning.
And so what was it like when you were transitioning? You're in hospital and everything's sort of taken care of for you in a way. And then you come out after 5 months. You're kind of doing this ping pong thing, right? Like, where would you go when you left hospital? How would you piece together your life?
Well, there were a lot of those moments, so it's just kind of all a smudge right now. I'd managed to pull myself together.
Sure.
I remember one time a social worker put me on welfare or something like that, and I got an apartment. My mother helped me get an apartment, and then I didn't like that one and moved to one that I liked better. And there were times when I lived with my parents as a young adult. That was horrendous. Not a good thing. I don't recommend that. And I
Just
was able to
staying with your parents bit when you were in that situation?
Yeah.
Mm.
And another time I was in California. I went to Berkeley because I was told that's where there's a lot of disturbed hippies, and I could probably get better treatments out there, which was a huge roller coaster out there. But anyway, I saw a psychiatrist there who got me on something called Aid to the Totally Disabled. Can you imagine being labeled? I felt like third base with that kind of a label, totally disabled, but huge amounts of money. I could have gone world traveling and everything if I had kept that
label.
Yeah. If I kept the payments from that label.
And so you're surviving essentially, and you've got this new information, you're managing your mental health, you've got different kind of situations keep changing. Like, how are you coping with this? That might sound like a ridiculous question because you've got paranoid schizophrenia, right? But still, there's something about how we manage a mental illness, right? And if we're getting appropriate support, or if we feel we can talk, or if we feel judged and stigmatized, like, what was that bit like for you?
Well, I can talk about the stigma.
Yeah.
I applied for jobs at one point during all this relapsing. And I thought, I got a certification in California to teach at junior colleges and applied to a lot of them. I applied to laboratories. In those days, it wasn't that hard to get a job. And after 20 job applications and not getting nowhere, I started getting suspicious about my professor's recommendations. Now, we didn't have a Freedom of Information Act then, so I couldn't look at these. What I had to do is send my file to a friend pretending I was applying to work with him. And he told me what they said. These are recommendations. They said, he's a campus goody-goody. That was because of my political activities. And another one said, he's brilliant but remote. So, I can understand why they did this because of the old boys club and protecting themselves and all this. But they should tell me, I think ethically, I can't give you a good recommendation and not give bad recommendations. That's, so that's some stigma.
Yeah.
And as far as the help and coping, I went through a lot of different kinds of things. I mean, I had therapists that were mostly useless. Some few were actually harmful. And
How come? Mm.
I had I was out in Berkeley. I was a member of what's called the Berkeley Rap Center. That was probably around 1970. The psychiatrist in charge of the whole thing was involved in what's called radical psychiatry.
Sounds dangerous.
The chief premise is that so-called mental illness is caused by capitalism. That's the main premise.
Oh my. So how do they rid one of that?
Well, I mean, they didn't work on capitalism. There was groups and individual sessions that I was involved with somebody else. And this was using Eric Berne transactional analysis.
Mm-hmm.
I'm okay, you're okay,
Yeah.
It was pretty good. It was sort of a community for me.
Sure.
And we did other things besides getting therapized.
But community is so important. And you mentioned with the harmonica and the music stuff, you like to play with other people. And there's something about the coming together without stigma and judgment and having community based on music or therapy or whatever it might be, right? That can kind of just be uplifting, regardless of whether it's therapy. It's the people together that can kind of support us.
Right. Yeah, that's been so important all my life, this idea of community, probably going back to my Jewish roots. The tribal sense of Judaism is, and when I was growing up, through all those difficulties without a father, fortunately, there were people, extended family, men who would support me and teach me things, and more like a father figure.
Be there. So you're sorry, go ahead.
Well, that's still a search today, is community.
It's a tricky one, right?
Very, yeah.
The world is more and more fast-paced and disconnected, it seems. People seem to be losing the skill, I think, of connection and community.
Definitely, yeah.
Right? So yeah. you're not alone. But it's so crazy. I speak to so many people who are like, community, community, community. And I'm like, all right, if everyone's saying this, then what the hell's going on, right? Why aren't we just reaching out and connecting? But that's another topic, perhaps. So you're going through the frustration, you're realizing there's stigma of trying to apply for jobs, trying to be productive, make some kind of life for yourself. But then you also said something about getting a master's degree. So I'm wondering when that happened, or how you're kind of finding the resilience to do some of these things.
I think that comes from my mother. Her expression was, if something doesn't work, don't keep doing it, try something else. And I think even Einstein said something like, someone who keeps doing the same thing over and over and getting the same negative result, that's a definition of insanity.
Yeah.
So I kind of a trailblazer, I guess, in my life, much more than other people that I know. I've changed lifestyles, tried different things. Something doesn't work, become aware of it, try another. That's what the resilience comes from.
And it's that practice, right? All of those situations build up your resilience.
Yeah, in a way. I wouldn't recommend going in a mental hospital to build up your resilience, but there are things that happen anyway, and to be aware and be open to what's going on in your life, have some regular habits of journal writing or going on retreats or whatever it takes to kind of track what's going on, having goals and making little steps to reaching them, being aware of bad habits and trying to get good ones in there instead. There's a lot of ways, and certainly the community support is a very strong thing for me in terms of accountability and tracking. In fact, I want to mention one little thing about that. I discovered eventually that my need for community was so great, I didn't know who I was without a reflection from other people. But I realized I was in a really terrible situation, very dirty mirror, but I needed it so badly, even though it was dirty. And from then on, I kind of gradually weaned myself away from that specific need with community of being mirrored. So I feel really good not needing that anymore.
Because what's the downside of that? Of just like your self-worth, it sounds like is connected or attached to like that mirror, how other people see you, rather than
Yeah.
your inner self-worth. Is that right?
Yes. And what about all those dirty mirrors? What kind of reflection do you get from them?
Yeah, and that would be a bit of a process to like just to first of all have some awareness and then create some distance. But it's kind of scary if you then you know, you'd be like, if I lose that way of coping with things, what am I left with? Who am I
Yes.
looking at? Or you know, do I have to look within? Right? Like, how do you even do that?
Well, I think that's a lifelong learning process. And I'm I made a goal to meditate more regularly. And a few years ago, maybe 4 years ago, I learned Vipassana meditation. I went to a retreat and learned it, and I've been doing that about 20 minutes regularly, but not regularly enough. So I decided I'm going to do this every day, even if I only do 3 minutes of it. It will be building towards creating a habit.
And
And
so, do
like,
you feel that some of these things, meditation, you talked about journaling, goal setting, community, these sorts of things, have been helping to support your mental health?
sure, of course, yeah. And
Yeah,
also other things. I
yeah.
mean, there's a whole slew of lifestyle things like diet, exercise, the creativity part we talked about. In there's a lot of individual lifestyle things. Then there's things like relationships and communication. So when somebody thinks they caught schizophrenia, it's a disease. I don't really buy the disease model for so-called mental illness.
Mhm.
I don't think that the peer-reviewed literature supports it. In fact, I think Mexico is definitely, we know that Mexico is controlled by the narcos. All of just about everything I don't know what it's like in London, but in the United States, the pharmaceutical industry controls the rest of the country. They control the media, they control the borders in terms of people going to Canada for reasonably priced drugs. And basically, they're harming and killing people with what they put out, but they're making money doing that. So that's,
I do remember being in the States, it did feel more kind of in your face, abrasive, unapologetic. You know, even just in the advertisements and about how you need medication for everything, it feels like that message is constantly there.
yeah,
Here, they definitely, if you go to your doctor and talk about a low mood, they do give antidepressants out very quickly, but we don't have as many kind of adverts constantly saying you need this medication to make your life better. Um, but that's one of the most difficult and even horrific things from the conversations I've been having on this podcast, where somebody comes with a mental health issue or a challenge, and the medicalized approach, you're going into a mental institution, the amount of drugs, and not necessarily being given what you just talked about, which is skills around relationship, the not acknowledgement that we need community, especially if we have mental health issues, that we can still hold jobs, that we can still lead productive life, you know, like that uplifting, we all have mental health, how can we support each other message, rather than that like medicalized, stigmatized version of it, you know?
yeah. And also there's this aspect of acceptance that the medical profession doesn't have. They want to drug away whatever you're going through instead of taking a look at it, see what's the purpose of this? Where does it come from?
Tell me
You
about that.
know,
What's your journey around acceptance and purpose in your own mental health story?
well, hearing voices. I after 8 years in and out of hospitals, I finally made a definite decision. This is not working. You know, I'm there because people are making money and they're going to keep me coming back so they can have their
Mhm.
salaries in their profession.
But it's
So
not
I
helpful.
made a no, I made a decision. I'm going to do whatever it takes to never return. And one of the things besides non-compliance was that I got a really good therapist, private, not a state-funded one, but private therapist, highly recommended. She was dynamite. She told me, among other things, that those voices are about messages from your subconscious trying to make you feel important in the face of rejections.
Wow. Hmm.
So let's look at the rejections whenever you hear voices instead of getting involved in them. And that helped me tremendously. Now, other people, only in the past 4 or 5 years have I become aware of the peer support movement. And so I've attended Hearing Voices groups and gone to a couple of international conferences of people who hear voices. Some people cope with them or even use them productively, while there's other people that go nuts. What's the difference? Also, the idea that these voices are there for some reason, going back to like my family made me feel kind of worthless and rejected. So it's a whole buildup of stuff the whole lifetime coming into the psychedelics, which open up to all this too rapidly for me to understand.
So would you say that you think the psychedelics maybe triggered some of the paranoid schizophrenia?
Oh yeah, I'm pretty sure of that. Yeah.
Okay, so
you
that
could
was
say a drug-induced psychosis. I mean, I don't know. Technically, I'll give you the technical bullshit. I don't believe in this, but I'll give you. Some people have said that you're still in remission. This is 40 some years later, because paranoid schizophrenia is not supposed to be healable, according to a lot of psychiatrists.
Oh.
So I'm still in remission, and other people said you were misdiagnosed. So, I mean, I don't really care one way or the other, and I think the whole thing is baloney. All of these categories have no science base. They're all subjective. So, in other words, you go to one psychiatrist. I mean, if I saw enough psychiatrists, one of them actually gave me another label.
Oh.
I was so afraid to talk because I knew he would give me drugs or do something terrible if I said, so I didn't say anything. He would ask me questions and I just sit there. So I got a new label, catatonic. Yeah.
That's funny. Yeah.
I could have seen other ones who give me bipolar. I mean, it didn't, it's just there's nothing behind this.
Yeah. And there's so many crossover symptoms, aren't there? So people it is a little bit subjective. And that idea that it's not curable or that you must manage it now for the rest of your life can feel pretty devastating for the amount of people that I know that have attempted to take their life or have gone to that extreme once they had the diagnosis, because they just felt like it was a death sentence anyway,
And you'd be surprised at the number of people that are begging for diagnosis.
Yes.
They want to name the thing. It's going to somehow be a lot better with a name.
Well, and I have seen that some people do benefit from that in a way. Like they think, oh, if I've got borderline personality disorder, at least I know what I'm working with. I can read up on that. Maybe I can get a therapist who specializes in that, right? What people don't know is that it's often not an exact science, and there's so many variables because the human condition is complex, right? And has to do with our attachment, our love, our care. What are the internal voices that we all integrate into our psyche, right? About our self-worth. And for you, it's just the volume's a little bit turned up, right? For us, we just think it's our own inner self, our critic, our own voices of something we need to believe. So there's a different volume to it. Now, you said acceptance and purpose. I'm curious what you feel the purpose has been of you getting this diagnosis and having this whole journey around your mental health issues.
Well, I like to feel that the purpose has to do with me then being able to help others and guide them through this kind of stuff. That's one thing I think about. One thing my coach, earlier I told you about a coach that helped me make this decision not to do coaching. She said, your life is what is the thing that is going to help people, your story. So there's a lot of ways to pursue helping people. It doesn't have to be coaching. It could be writing. I have a memoir that I self-published and doing a rewrite. There's other ways. I work in Quora. It's a forum, and I answer questions on psychosis and other mental health areas. And so purpose, yeah. Part of the purpose, I guess, was to I feel like I call this the bumpy road, my memoir. Like we're talking about these decisive life moments. Somehow I was going down the wrong path, decidedly wrong. I thought you get a wife, you have a family, a car, get a
Yeah.
house, you have a nice career, and that's what life is.
Yeah.
And so all these things kind of didn't work. And I got to a certain point where, bam, I needed 8 years in and out of hospitals to really wipe out all of this, clean the slate entirely, start something new. In fact, I started a new career during that time when I decided I wasn't going back to hospitals. This was also immensely helpful. I I had apprenticed to a weaver, a fiber artist at the university, because that's what I wanted to learn. And
Okay.
this was very different than being a scientist. I'd work for him 8 hours a day and then go home and work on my own projects. So I stayed out of the milieu. I stayed out of the clubs and the streets and focused on myself. And this kind of meditative weaving's a very meditative experience. And it's you come up with an artistic expression.
And I love what you say about purpose, because for many of, probably a theme with many of our stories on the podcast is that they're doing the sleepwalking through life, right? Like, if I just get the wife and the this and the that and whatever, then I tick the boxes and I'll be happy and that's what life will be, right? And then something happens. I spoke yesterday to a guy who went to prison, and he had a good life, he had good parents, but he was just, and that just disrupted his view of the world, his perspective. And of course, countless other people, they've lost somebody close to them, they have their own personal struggle, whatever it might be. And there's something in that moment that they can either choose to go down a cycle of addiction, abuse, whatever themselves, because it becomes too much to grow from it, right? Or like yourself and like myself, we can end up eventually being truly woken up by that experience, and leading a different life with the purpose eventually of supporting others to also wake up and live their best version of themselves.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, so good. So you talked about a few kind of practices that you do. I love some of those: meditation, journaling. What do you do at the moment? Because I know that we can sometimes evolve, right? So like, we can have phases where we do different things that help our mental health. What kind of stuff do you do at the moment to look after your own mental health?
Well, one thing that's kind of fun is, I probably have heard of Julia Cameron, who wrote a book called The Artist's Way, very popular.
Yes. Yeah, very popular.
So I looked at it and I didn't like the book that much, but I took up the writing in the morning. Every morning I spend about 20 minutes of writing a few pages very quickly, no grammar, no, no.
Don't overthink it. Yeah.
And you never reread it. It's all about pulling things out of the subconscious, because of the way the pen and the ink goes onto the paper, somehow stimulates things. So that's one little thing that I do. I do a lot of little things, and I'm realizing that I really love nature, but the computer has a hold on me, and I have to work on that. I'm addicted to looking at the email, looking at the social networks, and
yeah, I think we all have that problem. And then
yeah.
you start feeling it in some way, and then go, "Oh, right, trees, nature. We've got to balance it out."
A lot of friends convince me that I need to have a smartphone. I have one of these ancient kind of things, a Nokia.
Oh
That's
my
my cell
goodness.
phone.
Yeah.
I don't access the internet on this thing. And I keep thinking, well, I need Uber, so I better get one of these, or I need this or that app. But
Yeah.
so far I've resisted, and I'm glad I have. But it gets close sometimes, because like Google Maps, there's a lot of things that would be nice to carry around when I'm hiking, and that kind of thing.
Sure. But it's a good point that so many of us, we talked about connection and community. So many of us are like that on our devices, right?
It's terrible, yeah.
Right. And not doing, kind of checking in and seeing people.
There's another aspect I could mention about that, and that's has to do with reading books.
Mm-hmm.
So many people, especially children, it's disastrous. They don't know how to read. And what does reading do? Reading is not like speaking. Speaking is kind of genetic, but reading is a learning process. So when you are really a good reader, the reading creates critical thinking. It creates empathy, because things are really slowed down. And there's a third thing I can't think of, but so we're losing all that stuff by going digital and not reading books. And
even though
really,
it is the information age, so the podcasting, the YouTube, but it depends who you choose to listen into. But I get what you mean. We're losing that cognitive ability to just read and absorb and slow things down. Whereas there's, you know, on audiobooks, you can literally speed up the language. So it can be like 4 times, 5 times, 6 times as fast as they would have normally read, in the hope of just like getting the whole book into you in a shorter amount of time, which in a way is tragic, you know? I get it. I'm all for efficiency. I run my own business. So I'm like, how do we hack time and create efficient stuff, right? But then there's all these little bits that when you do slow down, you end up noticing, you end up realizing what we're losing, you know, in this fast-paced way of living.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if I have an answer for that because I never really, I mean, in 2003 is when I retired. And I would say, I don't know anybody that has as low a stress life as I have. The biggest stress for me is running to catch the bus. There's a bus that goes outside my door into the center of town. And sometimes I have to meet somebody in the rush. Oh, the bus. Oh.
Yeah. The big stress.
Once in a while, personal things happen. Maybe I should bring this up. It'd be good to hear. Personal stuff happens every few months somehow. Something I get into, you know, really angry or really scared or something like this happens, right? It's just part of my life. I don't try and have that happen, but shit happens. So when it does, my main goal now is to, as quickly as possible, become aware of it so I can work on it. Because my ego loves these kind of moments. It just really, that juices the ego to feel angry or feel scared. You know, people actually go to these horror movies so they can get scared
on purpose.
Or read books. Yeah. Anyway, so how to manage this is to, as quickly as possible, becoming aware. Then when I'm aware, I can take the feeling inside into my body and see what it looks like, what color it is, where is it in my body, get to know this feeling and from a more quiet and compassionate perspective, and say, where does this emotion, you know, why am I feeling this? What's going on here? Is this about survival? And maybe I don't need to have this anymore because I'm surviving okay. So I can thank this emotion for having been with me in all these years and helped me survive. And then I can say, thank you very much, but please leave and don't come back again. I don't need you anymore. So this whole process is valuable, but it all starts with awareness, which is so tricky for me to quickly get a handle on these things.
And it takes practice, and it sounds like any kind of meditation practice can just help us, or types of therapy, somatic experiencing type therapy, to help us connect into the body and what's happening.
Even journaling. Journaling is a way to learn. There's so many things. I mean, I'm about to publish a book on 6 tools for self-empowerment. Cool. And they're all the basic way of forming goals and tracking is with journaling. So with any of these techniques, journaling is the core for me. So I'd say that's a number 1 tool that I use. And I've done this, that's how come I was able to write a memoir, because I have all these experiences recorded going way back and indexed.
Amazing. So tell us about that. Tell us where people can find your book, or if they want to connect with you for any reason in your story, how can they find you?
Well, my website, which is not a great website, and also I'm going through so many changes, has a lot of information. Don at donkarp.com, K-A-R-P, Don at donkarp.com. So that has my social media. It has a contact box, and tells about workshops, speaking engagements, things like that, and the memoir.
We'll add that to the show notes.
Yeah, and when I do publish a book, some ebooks are going to be coming up soon. I'm juggling 5 or 6 different things, and not moving ahead very quickly on them, but they're there.
Have to, right? That's the beauty. That's the beauty of retirement. So finally, thank you for telling us about your website. We'll add that into the show notes. But if there was one piece of advice, just to end the podcast on, if there was one piece of advice that you would give to your younger self, to the kid who is starting to hear voices, perhaps, is getting a little bit nervous and scared, and has been holding on to things for his whole life, right? What advice would you give him? With all your knowledge and wisdom.
Yes. Okay, here, I'd say write down all the things that make you happy, activities that you can do on your own that make you happy. And make sure you do one, at least one every day. Keep track of that.
I love that so
Follow
much.
your bliss. That's also a career, or follow how to create a goal.
Yeah.
What makes you happy? Your career. Does it make you happy? If not, find out what does make you happy and do that.
Change it, experiment, change it. Don, thank you so much for your time and your wisdom all the way from Mexico. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, London. Thank you, Petra.